Chapter 36, Part 2. Durant saw Halstead strike the match. The waves of flame rolled and rushed through the canyon and into the tunnel itself, blowing past he and Renoir. But they pressed on, following in Finbar's footsteps. At the trench, Durant watched Caitlin and Francois disappear into the wire to his left. Just ahead of him, he saw Finbar and Donnie scurrying ahead, plunging through the wire. To his right, he saw Rupert, Wolfgang, Jonah, James, and Adolf forging their own path. A glance back over his shoulder made Durant's breath catch as the Red Maiden directed her faltering foot soldiers. Her cry of "Go!" echoed through the canyon over the roar of the fire. As the pursuers charged up the hillside, Durant and Renoir hit the barbed wire, following Finbar and Donnie. Donnie had escaped the first metal hedgerow and was running through no man's land toward the next line of trenches. Wolfgang and Jonah followed Rupert. The little man ducked and high-stepped quickly through the same tangled wiring he had spent years cultivating, cutting, and navigating. Jonah's slight frame let him follow close behind Rupert, and he matched the little man's steps. But the passage that worked for the pair of them would not do for Wolfgang. His size and strength would be the death of him now, he was sure. The rifle on his back kept getting hung up and yanking him to a stop. He paused to unsling it, even considered throwing the fucking thing away for the little good its rounds did against the dead. Instead, he used the butt end to shove the steel tangles down and aside, forging his own path through the sharp coils of wire. James was just behind him, heeling the track that Wolfgang was doggedly making. James looked past Wolfgang, trying to see where Donnie had got to, but his pal was long gone. When he saw Rupert and Jonah 5 yards beyond them, escaping from the first line of wire, sprinting into the open field toward the second trench, he had the absurd impulse to shove Wolfgang forward, anything to make him go faster, but he resisted the temptation. He looked to his right. Adolf, face white as the falling snow, desperately ploughed through the thicket, senseless of the barbs, his desperation a close mirror of the propelling terror inside of James. James knew they were coming too. He did not want to, but he looked back anyway. 4 rabid men leapt the trench and hit the wire. There was no hesitation in them, no fear of ensnarement or pain, nothing but the gleam of desire, a killing purpose in bright eyes that promised violence, explicit. The monsters tore through after them. James felt like a fawn being hunted by a pack of wolves. The dead man leading them drove through, closing the distance with Adolf. It shot its arms out and snagged his collar, yanking Adolf back, pulling him into the wire, snarling. Adolf barked out a high-pitched yelp as he fell. The thing threw its arm around his neck, squeezing him tight. He screamed again, but the thing choked it off. Adolf tasted the stench of death and fetid, congealed blood. Its wet breath hit his ear, and he sensed its teeth. And then it was whispering, pouring that stinking heat into his ear with its rasping, dead voice. "Come and see," it said, and Adolf saw, and it was not good. The violence of the strike cut the vision short. Adolf's eyes opened as the steel butt of the Mauser came slamming down fast a second time. It missed him by inches, striking the Whisperer's dead face dead center, silencing the gift it had been delivering to Adolf. Wolfgang raised the Mauser again and drove it down a third time into the beast's head, pulping it. Then he turned the rifle around and fired as quickly as he could, ejecting and racking in rounds, slowing the advance of the other 3 demons. "Get him!" Wolfgang yelled to James. James grabbed Adolf. The German's white face was spattered with mealy brains and blood from the broken demon. Jamin latched onto his jacket lapels, pulled him up, and dragged him onward, desperate. Wolfgang's last round echoed. He backed away, following James. The three standing demons were not rushing in now. They had taken their bullet wounds in stride. The wolves had their buck at bay. They were coming for him, slow and patient. He might have horns, but they had numbers and teeth. An opportune strike would drop him, then the pack would have their way. Beyond Wolfgang, James dragged Adolf free of the wire. The pair ran after Jonah and Rupert without looking back. Through the snow, James saw Jonah leap the trench ahead of him, barely clearing the gap. Just behind him, Rupert's short legs fucked him good. Rupert's front toes hit the sandbags and slipped out from under him. He reached out with his arms, trying to catch the edge, but his chest and chin took the brunt of the hit. He lost hold, slipping and falling sideways, crashing down into the 8-foot deep trench. Jonah stopped at the wire and looked back. James and Adolf were running down the slope toward them, but little Rupert Fuchs had disappeared. He scrambled back to the lip of the trench. Below him, Rupert pushed himself up off the duckboards. Jonah lay flat, extending his hand. "Give me your hand! Come! They are coming!" Rupert stood back. He took 2 running steps, planted a foot on the fire step, and leapt. His hand caught Jonah's, and he started climbing up his arm, nearly pulling the boy in with him. Jonah spread his body wide and tried desperately to hold fast. Wolfgang stopped. He stood his ground in the barbed wire as the demons picked through the metal bramble patch toward him. In one move, Wolfgang spun the rifle and grabbed the shaft. He swung it like a cricket bat. It careened across and connected with the nearest monster's jaw, shattering and knocking it sideways. He swung it back across, driving the thing away. But the second cut missed badly. Its momentum spun him, sending him off balance, stumbling in the wire, nearly tripping. He took 2 long steps trying to catch himself, and suddenly he was free of the wire, in the open field. Wolfgang dropped the rifle. He ran. The demons burst out of the entanglement after him. Wolfgang kept his gaze straight ahead. 100 yards east, James and Adolf reached the support trench and vaulted it. Wolfgang thundered through the field in their footsteps. Rupert saw flashes of movement as James and Adolf jumped the trench above him. James reappeared and reached over Jonah, grabbing Rupert's other hand. He and Jonah pulled hard, yanking the little man up and over the sandbags in one motion. Adolf was already halfway through the next stretch of entanglements when Rupert, James, and Jonah stumbled into the jungle of wire. James looked back. Wolfgang cleared the trench cleanly. The 3 monsters chasing him were almost through the snowy field too, sprinting downhill. Before they leapt the trench, James had already turned away, surging into the thicket and fighting through, as driven by a purpose as the men hunting them. He had gone gently the past night, practically walking himself into the fire on the demon's request. This time he swore that he would not go peaceably. He would not be a good boy. He very much did not want to be caught again, bound up to a stake and roasted alive. Donnie had lost his mind. He was an outside observer in his own body. Even on his best days, he had never been what anyone would term an athlete. So he could not say where he had found the speed, strength, and agility to do what he was doing now. He had left James, Wolfgang, Jonah, and Adolf far behind at the barges. He had passed Rupert on the climb and nearly caught Finbar. When Donnie summited the canyon wall, he just kept tearing forward. He passed Finn and then cleared the first trench cleanly, then moved through the stretch of wire beyond it, fast and nimble, any stiffness in his knee, hip, and elbow a thing of the past. He got through that wire and ran on through the killing field to the next trench. Again, his leap was smooth and strong. He landed on his feet and used his momentum to carry himself into the final entanglement. He ducked ducked and dodged, wading through it at a fast, steady pace. It was thrilling. When he broke free from the wire, he was in a snow-covered field that stretched 1/2 kilometre. He could barely make out the edge of distant trees through the falling snow. Donnie halted. He had no idea where to go now. "The woods. Why'd you run for them woods, honey?" The old woman's voice sounded familiar, a dreaming memory tickling his brain. Her advice seemed sound. Donnie decided to trust it. Perhaps it was just instinct speaking to him. In that case, he thought he'd better listen to her. She had gotten him this far. He turned south and ran for the woods. Caitlin and Francois were halfway through the second line of wire. They fought forward. Caitlin could see that beyond the last strung steel, a wide, open stretch beckoned. There was a flash of movement far to her right, and she saw Donnie running out into the open. He paused in the field, looking back for a half-second. Then he turned away and ran on, disappearing into the blizzard. Caitlin looked ahead. The only impediment to a likewise free run to the woodland was a 10-yard stretch of tight-knit barbed wire directly before her. Caitlin heard the men behind them, crashing and pushing their way through, fast closing the distance. Caitlin looked back in time to see the thing leap forward. She cried out, "Francois!" It latched its hands onto Francois' sword arm and pulled back hard, trying to drag his arm back to its open mouth and gnashing teeth. Its lower legs were wrapped in wire, but its lock on Francois' hand was like a steel manacle. The other three were coming in fast, not as reckless as their companion, but equally intent on bloody murder. Caitlin grabbed the shotgun sling and yanked it over her head. She fumbled with the gun and brought it around. She cocked the hammer, shoved the barrel into the face of the one that held Francois, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The face imploded. It did not let go. The others were nearly there. Caitlin racked the slide and pointed at the thing's elbows. Boom! 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 The shells did their trick, turning the thing's arms to pulp. The hands went limp. The release was sudden. It sent Francois tumbling backward. He landed on a nest of wire that caught and held him in its metal web 3 feet off the ground. His cutlass fell from his grasp, disappearing below him. He heard another boom, boom, boom of the shotgun's report. Then Caitlin was out. The hammer clicked down harmlessly on the empty chamber. Francois wrenched himself over and looked down. He saw his cutlass in the snow, inches from his fingertips. He pressed down through the wire, reaching for the saber. The barbs tore into his chest and neck, but Francois kept stretching for the cutlass's pommel, nearly pushing it out of reach. His fingertips brushed it, and for a moment it slipped through his fingers, but then he had it. He inched it toward himself, grasped the pommel, and pulled it free. Caitlin was next to him, backing her way through, the empty shotgun held up to ward off the 3 men coming for her. Francois yanked his right leg forward and planted it, using it to shove himself up to standing. The nearest man reached out for Caitlin. She punched out with the barrel of the empty shotgun, catching him squarely in the mouth, breaking teeth, knocking him briefly backward. When he reached out again, Francois's blade was already cutting the air, arcing up and over, striking the thing's hands, severing one completely, mangling the other. It shrieked in rage. Caitlin took a step back. Then she was clear of the barbed wire, in the snowy field. Francois could see the open field, but he stopped where he was, standing fast in the thicket. Better to fight them here than in the clear, where they could circle him easily and overwhelm him. While the one whose hands he had mangled stood back, the untouched pair fought through, hell-bent on Francois. As the first reached striking distance, Francois slashed down with the saber, cutting through its shoulder and collarbone, slicing across its torso, scattering cold blood. The dead man roared but pressed onward. Its right fist held a long bayonet, and he thrust out, lightning fast, toward Francois's belly. Francois danced back, Barely missing impalement, the thing stumbled and stabbed out again. Francois dodged, but his feet caught, and he fell backward, legs trapped in the wire, arms spinning through the air. He landed hard, flat on his back in the fresh snow. The man with the dead arm and the bayonet saw his advantage. He leapt over the last strings of wire. Boom! 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 Double-aught, at point-blank range, shattered the dead man's legs, and he whipsawed down, face first, into the jumble of wire. Caitlin grabbed another shell from her bag and slid it up into the belly of the shotgun. "Get up, Francois! Get up!" She fumbled in the bag and found the last shell. She dropped the shell bag and snapped the round of buckshot in. Francois kicked his boots hard, cutting his shins on the wire, but then he was free. The last demon had stopped. It stared at them through the entanglement, surrounded by its cut and blasted comrades. He sang. "Oh, my name is Jock Stewart. I'm a canny gunman, and a roving young fellow I have been." Caitlin shook. She racked the shotgun shell. She aimed low. Boom! The first shot took out his left ankle. He stumbled. Boom! Her last shot struck his right knee. He fell into the wire, laughing. Francois grabbed his cutlass. Caitlin stumbled back, away from the Siegfriedstellung's ramparts, shotgun aimed back at their pursuers, an empty threat. Francois took Caitlin's arm and turned her. He led her at a dead run, south, across the field, toward the sanctuary of the thick woods beyond it. Finbar was nearly out of the thicket when he heard Caitlin's final shotgun blasts. He stepped free from the wire and watched her run with Francois. Finbar hesitated for the briefest moment. Then he tucked his brutalized hand against his belly and ran in the same direction. There were 14 men fighting through behind him. As they heard them coming, the reek of their dead flesh assaulted his senses. Black Betty was just in front of him, frenzied, stamping and barking, roaring at his pursuers. As he crawled under the last barbed strands, a hand shot out and grabbed his bad ankle. Isaiah kicked hard and yanked free. He grabbed hold of a long stake at the edge of the entanglement and dragged himself out. Isaiah looked back. The dead were just behind, crawling through the last stretch as he had. Isaiah kicked the metal stake he had used to pull himself free. It yawed sideways. He grabbed it with both hands and rocked it back and forth. Then he twisted and yanked it out of the earth. He gripped the corkscrew end and tested the weight. It was no sweat 16-pound maul, but it was better than nothing. When he saw what was coming behind the 14, his heart sank. On the far side of the entanglement, past the trench beyond it, a woman on horseback charged down from the peak. Thousands of men were racing down the hill behind her. As they dropped the stake, he ran. Black Betty loped ahead of him. The first dead men got through and ran after them. The woods were 500 yards away. It might as well have been 500 miles. Adolf cleared the last tangled wire alone. He was a mess. His own blood from the wire's nicks and the demon's remains on his cheeks were grotesque. But Adolf had moved beyond vanity. He knuckled down and started running, just keeping on, not caring where his feet took him, as long as it was not here. He reached the cover of the woods. 100 paces in, he bent over and caught his heaving breath. He remembered what the demon had said to him. Bile started coming. He choked it down for a half second, but it fought up, bursting out of him, splattering into the snow. He gagged again as his belly cramped hard. The sound of fighting in the field behind him shocked him to standing. He could not tell who was being killed, nor could he care. It was not him, and right now that was all that mattered. Adolf spat out the remnants of green bile. He lowered his head and ran deeper into the woods. He would put this all behind him. When he looked up, he pulled up sharply. Escape cut short. All the running had been for nothing. Death had found him. The steel of the cutlass shone blue, catching the reflection of snow that had reached the ground through the tree canopy. Francois's blade pointed directly at Adolphe's face. Adolphe threw his hands up. "No, don't kill me, don't kill me!" Francois held his hand. "The blind Boche," he said. Caitlin came out of the darkness behind him. "Did anyone else get through?" she whispered. Adolphe shook his head. At the rush and jabber of her incomprehensible English, he shrugged. Kein English! Kein English! Kein English! Shh! Keep quiet!" she said sharply. They all listened for a long moment. There was nothing more from the field. "Come," said Francois. "I know a place we can shelter. Follow me." Caitlin nodded. Francois led the way. Adolphe hesitated. A little thrill passed through him. A revelation. The first vision the demon gifted him had just come true. James Cox could not bear the shame of them seeing him run. He wanted to run after Adolphe and disappear into the falling snow as he had. But Jonah and Rupert were not running, so he remained. The three young men watched as Wolfgang fought his way through, 3 demons on his heels. James looked up. There were others running across the field toward them. Durant was in the lead, followed by Renoir. Then the 2 of them were grabbing Wolfgang's arms and kicking the wire aside, pulling him free, and all 6 of them were running together. The demons hunting Durant and Renoir slipped free of the wire and joined the 3 who had nearly taken Wolfgang. They ran full tilt now. They could taste blood. James was running. He was not alone, and he was glad of that. Dying alone seemed much, much worse. Then he heard it. The thunder of galloping hooves. He ran, flat out. He felt like a soaring bird must feel just before the falcons strike. He sensed the blows coming before they hit. He had never felt so alive. Then there was the sound of the horses and the sing of steel cutting the air. James felt his foot catch on the remains of a stump. It tripped him badly, and he stumbled, reaching out his arms as he went. His palms hit the snow and slid wide. His face bounced off the ice, and he skidded to a stop on his side. When he pushed himself up and looked back, it was the most glorious thing he had ever seen. The horsemen roared out of the snow and drove into the pack of demons. It was dancing, roaring chaos as the horses bucked and trampled their prey, while the riders swung their sabres and lances down in vicious strikes. When the riders finally reined in their mounts, all 7 dead men lay broken and unmoving. James, Jonah, Wolfgang, Rupert, Renoir, and Durant were spread out, watching, stunned. Major Danforth kicked his charger and rode to where they stood. He was pale and spent, covered in spatters of blood and dirt. Lieutenant Hugh and Sergeant Tremaine did a quick check of the dead. Satisfied, they wheeled their mounts and followed Danforth. "Lieutenant," said Major Danforth, saluting. He looked at Wolfgang, Jonah, Rupert, and Renoir. "I see you've gathered friends." "Thank the Lord! How'd you find us?" James stuttered out as he stood. "Dumb luck or the Lord's work, perhaps both. Regardless, save your thanks. An entire host of them are coming through to the north. If you follow the tree line south for 6 miles, you'll reach San Quentin. Skirt the city. It was empty last night, but who can say it may be chock full of the buggers now. Southeast of the city where the canal joins the Somme, we've a vessel docked. We will meet you there at dawn. If you're not there, we will move on without you." His head cocked to the side, listening. "They're coming. Good luck, Lieutenant." Danforth nodded to the others. "Gentlemen." The exhausted riders turned their horses north and rode at a steady canter into the storm. There was no discussion. Durant, Renoir, Wolfgang, Jonah, James, and little Rupert Fuchs turned and ran in the opposite direction, following the line of trees due south. They settled in at a steady jog, heading into the coming night, away from the army of the dead that the horseman had gone to face down. James said a quick, devout prayer for their safety. A laughing voice inside of him said it would do little good. He recognized that the voice was Harlan's.